Good afternoon, morning, or evening, wherever you are in the world. I'm Leonard Slatkin, and I'm thrilled to be making my first appearance here on IDAGIO. I'm with my new best conductor friend, Michele Gamba. Hi, Michele, how are you?
Hello, I'm very well, thank you, Maestro. I'm very excited to have a chance to talk to you.
Actually, where are you?
I'm in Milan.
And
So
I'm in St. Louis.
there you go.
So
Globalization.
we're going to be talking about a few matters regarding the conducting profession, maybe a few things about my life and yours, as well as a discussion perhaps about the Berlioz Symphonie Fantastique, and we'll see where it goes from there. I did watch your interview with Franz Welser-Nust,
Yeah.
and I thought both of you did a terrific job. So I'm very happy to take questions from you, and from that, we'll see where we go.
Thank you very much. I mean, I've got billions of questions to ask you because I mean, I grew up with your name banging in my head. You've been a leading figure of the conducting world, of course. And what I always admired is the fluidity of your gesture, which was always very clear and polished, and yet so communicative. And I mean, the Fantastique is, of course, a huge fresco and a huge dramatic piece, which sounds to me as an opera almost.
Yes.
And I wanted to actually start from there. And you were also mentioning when we had a short chat the other day about the singing quality of the sound, and you were just talking about the long line that needs breathing itself.
Yes. Well, this is, first of all, a piece that almost every conductor will do in their lives. Very few conductors can avoid doing the Fantastique. But it's not a very easy piece, especially if you're doing it with an orchestra that has not played it. And that's going to happen for young conductors. They're going to be in the position of conducting it for the first time with an orchestra that may not have seen it. So how do we do that? How do we convey all these ideas? There are two possibilities, of course. The first and the most important is to show everything that you can with your hands, with the stick, with your face, and with your body. Often I think one of the most instructive times for me when I was younger was going to countries where I did not speak one word of the language. Yes, there are always some people who speak some English, some German, whatever it happens to be. But all of a sudden, you really have to be able to show as much as possible. So I took that, and then when I got to the point of being able to conduct orchestras that knew the piece well, you weren't starting from the technical point of view. You were starting right away with the musical. So you're right, this piece is about a long line. Almost every piece is about a long line. How do you get from the beginning to the end so it feels like a gigantic bridge? As I've gotten older, I would say that I'm more interested in the architecture of a piece of music, not just from movement to movement, but the totality, even if they seem unrelated. The Symphonie Fantastique, of course, there is a tune that's going to appear in every movement that helps hold it together. It makes Berlioz already an innovator, and I consider him to be perhaps the most innovative composer. We have to remember, Beethoven has only been dead for 2.5 years. Berlioz idolizes Beethoven, even wrote a gigantic essay about visiting Beethoven. So he structures this piece in a way as Beethoven did the Pastoral. Now, there's not exactly a program in the Beethoven, but each movement has a title, something again very unique, and 5 movements, not 4, again unique. So we can see these parallels. And again, like Beethoven, Berlioz requires understanding of the architecture so that we feel we've been taken on a journey somewhere that moves us. And we have to do that by showing not just the orchestra, but everybody what we think the music looks like. That's, to me, the job of the conductor. So when you talked about being expressive or whatever I happen to do, it comes from years and years of experience. And I think you'll find this as well, that as you move along in your career, you're going to find, as you see more symphony orchestras, it's a little different in opera, of course, that your beat will start to become more economical. The better the orchestra, the less you have to conduct. Exactly what Franz said. You don't have to do everything. You let the orchestra do it by listening to each other as if it was gigantic chamber music.
And of course, you mentioned the essential concept of actually breathing with music and with the musicians. And that's absolutely essential to string playing, of course, and of course to the woodwinds or brass players. But even talking about, you know, I mean, every gesture needs a good breath before
Correct.
to land properly, right? And
Well, it's against human nature not to breathe.
exactly.
So we've heard often that string players have an advantage. You were a pianist, right?
I'm a pianist. I'm a pianist.
I was a string player and a pianist. And even for us, when you play the piano, eventually the sound stops, which is like taking a breath. So we need always to show those breaths, those little lifts in a phrase, even if there's a passage that has a slur, a moment where you have to go from, say, the first bar almost to the eighth bar. And there's the idea that the composer shows us he wants it, or she, to make it one line. Still, maybe somewhere in there, you have to take a breath just because it's a natural feeling.
Of course. You were mentioning the program of the Fantastique. Would you suggest that a program evokes, it doesn't only paint a picture, but actually gets us to imagine much more than just a picture or a painting. It evokes emotions and of course state of minds that goes well beyond, you know, the painted picture, right?
Yes. I think the way to think about that is that music is really between two different elements: the people who are making the music and the people who are listening. The composer creates the music. So there's three elements, really. Composer writes it, musicians try to get an idea of what it's going to be, and the audience takes it their way. But if you go see a painting, it's you and the artist. You're having that communication, that dialogue, or an architecture or sculpture, whatever it happens to be. So we're kind of in the middle of all this. That raises, I think, the question, can you listen to the Symphonie Fantastique without knowing anything about the story? And the answer, of course, is yes. Of course we do. But it's helpful for an audience to know that Berlioz is in love with this Shakespearean actress from England, that he's trying to essentially court and woo her through this symphony. But it also reflects, because Berlioz leaves us the note in the score, this idea that he starts out just dreaming about her. And then in the second movement, the ball, he's maybe looking at her through a window as she's dancing somewhere, and he's feeling horrible because there is one melody, as we said, that's going to occur in the whole piece. That's supposedly about her, but it's really about him and his vision of who she is. Then we have the third movement where we're out somewhere in the countryside. Two shepherds are serenading each other across the hills. And finally, in the most dramatic moment, and I actually take the music to be somewhat erotic here, that when you build to this great climax where the music gets very intense and the strings are doing tremolos and the music and the cello and bass is very passionate, and then it calms down for a minute, then it comes up again, then it goes back, and finally we reach the ultimate moment. I think this is actually a dream of Berlioz of what he wants physically from his idée fixe. Then you have the march to the scaffold, where he's being taken to be hung, and at the last moment, as he's being offered perhaps the chance to wear a mask so he can't see anything, he imagines seeing her, and we hear the theme very quietly in the clarinet before whack, he's killed. And then finally, the witch's Sabbath. Again, Beethoven is only dead for about 2.5 years. And yet there's not a bar in the last movement where I could even imagine Beethoven writing anything like that. It's crazy. The effects that he gets in the sonority and all this, and then finally combining the dies irae with this other theme that's going on, and then finally just ending it in the most grand and glorious way that you can. The orchestra itself is not really so much larger than Beethoven would have used in the Ninth Symphony. The addition would be the chimes, certainly, and the E-flat clarinet. But other than that, it's more or less what Beethoven would have used. Timpani is there, just this time it's 2 or 4 players. Berlioz's imagination is truly astonishing. And when you get to do this piece, you don't find out how much you love it until you actually conduct it. It's one of those works that I never get tired of. I do it a lot, especially when I was with my orchestra in Lyon. We played it on tour, we did it all over the place. And I did it in Detroit, I recorded it. And somebody said, okay, you can come out of your house tomorrow, name 5 pieces you want to do right away. That's one of them.
I must confess that I've been obsessed with your recording with Orchestra de Lyon, of course, and then there is also a wonderful video of you with the Detroit Symphony Orchestra. And again, you were talking about actually you are achieving so much with these orchestras with so little. I mean, your gesture is always so focused and precise and exact, and not only in terms of mechanics, but just in terms of musical will and musical thought, which is actually it's wonderful to look at you, to watch you in action on
You're very kind.
such a great piece, and with there is no ceremonial or self-indulging, I would say, physicality, but it's always very focused on what the music is about. And it's as a young conductor, I take a lot of inspiration from that. So thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate that. But again, a lot of it comes from experience. And as you go on in your career path and you gain more confidence as a conductor, at first the tendency is all of us want to overconduct. We're going to show off. We're going to do as much as we can. We want to show the orchestra everything, and we want to show the audience everything. But when you get on in life and you have hopefully the same wonderful experiences that I've had, you discover that the best thing to do is actually to be minimal, certainly at the performance. Let the players do it by listening to each other. In a way, you're a little bit like the coach of a football team. You work out everything in the practice, and then you come to the game. And all of a sudden, some things are not in your control anymore. Of course, we hopefully don't have any opposition when we conduct, but sometimes something happens and you have to improvise. For us, we come in, we have an idea of how we would like the piece to sound, how we want it to go. But at the same time, I like to think that no performance is going to be like the one we gave even the day before. You want to have that spontaneity, but you've established what your parameters are going to be, your ground rules. And that has to do with the structure and the architecture again.
You grew up, of course, in the middle of a very legendary string quartet, which was the Hollywood String Quartet. And that sort of chamber music feeling must have actually infused some sort of enthusiasm for this approach to actually getting people to listen to each other.
You're right. And every evening, my parents, who were Felix Slatkin and my mother, Eleanor Aller, he was the first violinist, my mother was the cellist. Every night at 7 o'clock, the other 2 members would come into the house, and I would sit on the staircase and I would listen. So oddly enough, the first piece of music I ever remember was the 6th quartet of Heitor Villalobos. I don't think there's anybody else who can say that. But hearing this music, in a way, what we get to do as conductors is extraordinary, but we really don't have the same level of both intellect and expression as you find, say, in the late Beethoven quartets. as you might find in the 3 Brahms piano quartets or the quintet, certainly the Schubert cello quintet. I wish we really had that kind of music to conduct. Yes, we can do versions of those, I suppose, but it's not the same thing. But it influenced me a great deal, as did the other things my parents accomplished in their lives. My father was the concertmaster for the orchestra at the film studio 20th Century Fox. My mother was the first cellist at Warner Brothers. She gave the premiere of the Korngold Cello Concerto, which was meant for a film called Deception with Bette Davis. So I knew all the people in the film industry. And then there was the popular music side, with, in particular, Frank Sinatra, who became a very good friend of our family.
Amazing.
And to me, I go back to what Duke Ellington said. He had this wonderful phrase when he was asked, what is music about? He said, well, there are only 2 kinds of music. There's good music and the rest. And I took that to heart. I believed that. So to me, my earliest conducting experiences when I got into the professional world as an assistant not only encompassed doing works of the masterpieces, I did children's concerts, I did groups with rock and roll ensembles, I did jazz, I was a jazz pianist as well. And I never thought about the differences between them. I just thought either it's good or it's not. One thing that a lot of people don't really know so much about me is because of this upbringing, and in Los Angeles, where I was born, in the 1950s and into the 1960s, LA did not have an opera company. There was none. Once a year, the San Francisco Opera would come down and give 2 performances. Once in a while we went. So almost all of my experience with opera came from hearing it on the radio, on records. And I think that's influenced why I didn't have that very much in my background and didn't do a lot. You, on the other hand, you're a pianist, you play chamber music clearly, and you have experience now with feet in both worlds. And I think that's a big plus for you.
Well, yeah, I mean, I had to start to earn my own living when I finished my studies at the Vienna Conservatoire. I was rather concerned about my future as a young musician, of course, and they all of a sudden they said, well, come on, you're a pianist, you're Italian, you need to get a job in an opera theater and see how it goes. So I started off auditioning and preparing with preparing some opera scenes, and that's how I got into opera by chance, really. I was not really into that sort of frame, but that was really inspiring again, because I found myself challenged by so many different situations, like, I mean, singers, and of course
Yes, I can relate.
directors, and all sorts of aspects that might be involved in the theatrical performance. And that was really really interesting, and again gaining that sort of flexibility, reacting to what's actually happening on stage, and listening every sort of rehearsal. And any singer, you were saying again, you were talking about the singing quality and the breathing. I was watching and listening to the singers, and was watching them like a hawk to try to understand the mechanism. And that in a way, it's great. Certainly.
It's true. It's a bit, I'm actually trying to think if I know of an American conductor who started in the opera house, and I don't think so. Even James Levine, his first experiences were with the Cleveland Orchestra and George Zell. Yes, he knew all the repertoire, but Bernstein, no. We all came more or less from a symphonic background, and then entered opera a little bit later. In Europe, it's slightly different, but I think it's changing. I think the old school of coming from the opera house and then going to symphonic repertoire is not as valid now as it used to be. But the repertoire is enormously changed. Yeah. Imagine in the 2020, how many works of music there are for orchestra to do. And so it became, in a way, a separate category. We're not even talking about old music anymore. We're talking about standard, substantial symphonic fare.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, it is very refreshing for me as an Italian musician to hear what you were saying about the quality of music. I mean, music is either good or I mean, or it's not worth playing it. And it's not a matter of genre, but actually a matter of the actual quality of the piece you are playing. And that's refreshing, and that reflects in the freshness of your performances every time.
But it also is about your belief in the music. When you start, and any young conductors watching out there, if you have an opportunity to conduct anything, go do it. Experience. I gave the very first live performance of Jesus Christ Superstar. Did I wind up liking it? So-so. But it was a chance to conduct. So anything that comes up, you do it to get the experience, because you don't have the chance of having an orchestra in your home. You don't want that experience.
Yeah.
So your only chance is to conduct. You take them whenever they come, and you try to be expressive and get everything you want, either by showing it or at least trying not to have to explain too much. All we really have to tell people is louder or softer, faster or short, faster or slower, longer or shorter. Occasionally you have to say, okay, that was not together or that's not in tune. But really, it comes down to that. It's basics. And that, I think, helps us. Well, my clock says we're about out of time.
Okay, well.
And I wanted to thank you very much. It's been a pleasure to get to know you. I hope I do see you again. And everybody out there, IDAGIO is a great service. It's really helping to bring classical music to everyone in the best possible way. And maybe next time we chat, we can talk about that word classical, because I'm not so sure it's the best word anymore. Nonetheless, IDAGIO, thank you all very much. Michele, it's been a pleasure. I hope to see you conduct soon and to meet you in person.
Absolutely. Thank you very much indeed, Maestro. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.